the pediatricians, again, the same people who were probably trying to get me to resign through, unsanctioned processes, were aware of my findings, and they invited Russell Barkley to come to town as the keynote speaker for their annual pediatric conference. So he also knows what's about to come out. And he puts on a lecture for the public that's open the night for the, yes?
Now, for our listening audience, we have to give a little bit of a background on Russell Barkley.
Okay.
So Russell Barkley, Sean, and I know you're outside of the field, he was the guy when it came to ADHD, and he was a psychologist,
Right?
Research psychologist,
Clinical psychologist.
clinical psychologist. I mean, he wrote the books on this. Like his entire career was around the treatment of ADHD kids.
Yeah, entire career.
And little did I know he was on the pharma payroll. Right. So
yes.
Tell me what you know about that.
Oh, so a large portion of his income comes directly from the pharmaceutical companies. I think it's in that paper that you pulled up back years ago. I think it was 19% of his income maybe came directly from Eli Lilly. He was also funded by CHAD, Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Disorder, which is funded by the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah. And that's everything that he reported. And maybe he reports everything, but most of them didn't back then. So I would presume over the years he's taken millions from the pharmaceutical industry. And
that's not to mention the textbooks and the other things, right?
Oh, yeah. It's an enterprise. He is just part of the machinery. He's really like a pharmaceutical rep in clinical psychologist's clothing.
Yeah, yeah. And so you were identified as a threat.
As a threat.
If they're going to throw Russell Barkley at you, right? That's a big gun, right? They're taking the biggest of the biggest guns, and they're saying there's something about the work that you're doing that is threatening.
Exactly.
What was that movie? Aaron Brockovich?
Yeah.
You're like Aaron Brockovich in the ADHD world.
Yeah. Yeah. I need $1 for every time somebody has said that, or gee, this is a story by who's the guy who did all the law books.
It's not like Tom Clancy, but he's all the CIA stuff.
Yeah.
It'll come to me.
Yeah, it'll come. Exactly.
He's the pop culture guy.
Yeah, so they threw him at me, and the local newspaper quoted him, big story. We asked Dr. Barkley, and of course the newspaper usually doesn't refer to psychologists with the title doctor, but they did for Barkley.
Yeah.
We asked Dr. Barkley, is ADHD overdiagnosed? And they said he unwound. No, no, and no. No matter what the people read, hear, or see, it is not overdiagnosed. The problem is it's underdiagnosed and undertreated. So in other words, don't listen to anything you might hear or see. I'm telling you the truth.
Yeah. So interesting. Did you have data about how other countries were diagnosing ADHD?
I had information. I didn't have
prevalence rate.
I didn't have hardcore prevalence rates. We had a few studies that were percolating that were showing that they were diagnosing it at lower rates. But I did have the DEA contacted me, and they said, hey, we have a data set on Ritalin consumption rates for every community in the entire U.S. Wow. How about you take this?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm like, yeah.
This is where the John Grisham novel gets very interesting.
John Grisham.
Oh, there you go.
Can we put some music?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I took that, and I was able to look at what was going on nationally. And the cities in southeastern Virginia where I was conducting my studies were in the top 1% for the entire U.S. So I was very responsibly saying, look, ADHD is not universally overdiagnosed, but we know in some communities it really is. And we can't just, sweep this under the rug. This is a real problem.
And at this point, they were communicating ADHD as a biological condition, with a genetic component to it that they believe they have identified, correct?
Oh, yeah. 80% genetic. Didn't you know that?
Yeah.
How is that tested?
I mean, it's with the chemical imbalance lab tests I'm still waiting on with all my clients.
The Freedom of Information Act will reveal it to us.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think it's really important for our listeners to understand that ADHD is just a constructed diagnosis of constellations of symptoms.
Right.
There is no attention deficit hyperactivity biological disorder that we've identified in science. It's just a constellation of symptoms. So when people say my ADHD, they're often just kind of, and it's such part of popular culture now, they're just talking about their struggle to concentrate in a certain situation, right? Or maybe feeling a little bit hyperactive or bored. And it's become, so ingrained in our lexicon right now. But back then in the 2000s, I mean, you'd speak to most people, ADHD was this biological condition that has sound science behind it. And you had these people like, is it Biederman? Joseph Biederman?
Joseph
Biederman and Russell Barkley, and they were just well-known figures. They were doing the media tours. They were publishing the books, and it was like diabetes or any other identifiable condition, and they're reporting these drugs are, like insulin for diabetes. They correct this condition. And it wasn't what I was seeing as a young man in the schools. What I was seeing with kids not feeling well, decreased appetite. Some of them became very like drowsy or sedated. You'd have the kids say how they felt horrible.
Oh, yeah.
And they'd stop taking the drugs in the summer because of how bad it felt. I mean, there was the concerns about stunting of growth, right? Which I think is
real.
And, parents were reporting different things. Like they said it was magic for some kids in the way that it kind of subdued them. But they lost their kid, right? The magic about who they were was just gone.
And Russell Barkley said that in 1978 in one of his publications before he went to the dark side. And when he was doing honest, non-industry funded research, he said, well, this affects their classroom behavior, but it really doesn't help their learning. And it's really just subduing them.
Yeah, which we know for a fact. Right. I mean, this is part of some of your further research, right, around learning.
Yes. And so what I was seeing also, I was a clinician, so I was seeing the same thing where these kids are told they have ADHD. Even I had 2-year-olds then. This is back in the 90s and early 2000s. 2-year-olds medicated for ADHD.
Sick.
And it was, yes.
I have a 2-year-old, and depending on what time of
day. He's ADHD.
He's not.
Because I see him, he is running around. He's really hard to focus sometimes around mealtime.
Right before bedtime, too.
And when
it's like he's trying to regulate himself.
Those darn monster trucks, right? If those monster trucks are around, he's not focusing on some of the things you want him to do, like take a bath or things like that.
You know what really gets it going? It Bubbles. Bubbles get his ADHD fired up. He goes crazy.
But that's the insanity of all this, right?
Insanity.
That you take normal childhood behavior, and it's just variable, right? Because the world is varied and diverse, and we need the world to be diverse. Because I'm driving into my practice, and they're building all these different like apartment complexes and stuff, and I could never do that. I can't be out there and work in construction all day, right? This is kind of my job, right? Yeah. So the way society works is you have the diverse minds and interests, and this entire ADHD industry, in my opinion, has targeted some of the most active and creative individuals.
Absolutely.
That had a hard time functioning in this restricted way that we were told we were supposed to be able to behave. What kid